Now, since the beginning of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, Moscow's commercial aviation industry has taken a heavy hit. Aircraft industry giants such as Airbus and Boeing stopped supplying spare parts to Russia back in March. So how is Russia's commercial aviation industry holding up more than 9 months later? DW's Killian Bayer takes a closer look.
Despite the sanctions and being cut off from the deliveries of critical components, Russian airlines are still operating, even though there has been a 15 to 20% drop in passengers. For most people taking domestic flights in Russia, not much has changed.
In terms of flying jets, it was always going to take a bit longer because, of course, you've got stockpiles of spare parts. And, of course, you've got the existing aircraft that can be cannibalized.
More than 800 modern Western-built passenger jets were flown by Russian commercial airlines before the outbreak of the war. More than half of their flights operated on international routes. The majority of these flights have been terminated by sanctions. International routes were very lucrative, one of the most important forms of income. The harsh cutoff from this cash flow was very serious. And on the other side, you had the aviation industry. It has become very difficult to supply aircraft that are flying now with spare parts. Even before the war, airlines in Russia faced difficulty getting spare parts. A pilot took this video a year ago. It shows yellow slips written with the letters INOP, meaning inoperable. The situation has worsened drastically since the war. And prestige projects like the MS-21 and the Sukhoi 100 Superjet, both passenger aircraft built in Russia, have an Achilles heel. They depend heavily on West.
Yuri Rishetto joins us now. He's bureau chief at our DW studios in Riga. Hi, Yuri. So it's pretty remarkable that Russian aviation routes are still going despite nearly 10 months of sanctions. How is that even possible?
Well, look, the Russian aviation industry experienced a kind of shock immediately after the start of the war because Russian aircraft were no longer allowed to fly to the West overnight. At the same time, Airbus and Boeing ended their cooperation with Russia, and this despite the fact that almost all Russian aircraft come from Airbus and Boeing. But the fact that half of all Russian planes since then had to stay on the ground meant that these planes could be used as spare parts. However, the loss of almost 50% of flight routes became a blessing for the Russian aviation industry. So the most important thing for now for Russians is to maintain domestic airlines, and so far this is still working well.
So when we hear that domestic aviation is still doing well, but spare parts are hard to come by or have to be cannibalized from older planes, surely there are some safety concerns to consider, no?
Yeah, sure. The question is, of course, when the grounded aircraft will be taken apart and used as spare parts, and for how long that can last and replace safety repairs by the Western companies. We know that Russia has kept all the aircraft leased from the West by decree of President Putin. After all, that's more than 500 jets worth over $10 billion. One Russian expert we spoke to called it just a theft. Iran was also a great hope for Russian aviation. The country has been living under sanctions for decades and has developed various methods to circumvent them. But Iran uses aircraft from the 1970s and 1980s, which are less dependent on software updates. Aeroflot, in particular, has equipped its fleet with very modern aircraft in recent years that apparently don't need to be repaired so quickly. But at the same time, because Russia uses very modern aircraft that rely on those very technologies, it will be increasingly difficult to safely operate Western aircraft without computer updates. And Russia itself hardly builds its own aircraft, or at least not nearly enough.
So it's going well for now, but it might not go well for longer. Yuri Rishetto, bureau chief at our DW studios in Riga. Thank you very much.